start. So it's wonderful to see everybody here today. And I know that a lot of the kids study Chris Van Dusen's books at school, so it's wonderful to see you all here. Welcome to the 11th Leslie Rydell Memorial Lecture. My name is Karen O'Hearn, and I'm proud to be part of the Children's Department at the newly renovated library right down the hall. So if you haven't been to the new children's area, you really should see it. In case of an emergency, which will never happen, and we have to leave in a hurry, just go out the side. That's the way out of the library. And if you need hearing assists, we have several at the back part of the room. Don't be afraid if you have to get up and use the ladies' room or the men's room. They're right outside to the right of the the entrance. The Leslie Rydell Memorial Lectures was created in memory of Leslie Rydell by her family and friends so that young people could meet some of their favorite authors and illustrators. The award honors Leslie's love of youth literature and the sharing of books with young people. If she were here today, I know that she would be very pleased with this year's honoree, Chris Van Dusen. Born on St. Patrick's Day, lucky dog, in 1960. I'm Irish, but I wasn't born on St. Patrick's Day. Chris Van Dusen and his brothers entertained themselves by drawing. Two of his favorite authors for children are Dr. Seuss and Robert McCloskey. They inspired him to study fine art at the University of Massachusetts after high school. His talent for drawing cartoons and illustrations helped him to take a part-time job at a magazine for teenagers and then as a freelance illustrator for magazines such as Nickelodeon, Family Fun, and Disney Adventures. His first book, Down to the Sea with Mr. McGee, was published in 2000. And Mr. McGee appears in a lot of his books. So if he authored and illustrated the book, find Mr. McGee. He's somewhere in the book. This was followed by an impressive body of work, including illustrations for his own stories and for other well-known authors. And it's quite interesting to note that the author, Kate DiCamillo, spoke at the Leslie Memorial Series a few years ago, and now we are honoring the illustrator of the Mercy Watson books. I would like to thank the Rydell family for their continued support, for the Porter Square Books, where Leslie worked, for providing books for an autograph session after the talk, which that will take place outside, for the trustees for providing some very yummy treats. I had a sneak preview of that. And Tracy Miracle at Candlewick Books for providing Chris's contact information. Please join me in welcoming Chris Van Dusen.
Thanks, Karen. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I am really honored to be the presenter of the Leslie Rydell Memorial Lecture this year because I actually looked through the list of the previous presenters, and that made me a little nervous because there have been some royalty of children's books here at this library speaking over the years. So I just hope we have fun today. I got to tell you, first of all, I'm not a big fan of the word lecture, to be honest with you. I mean, lecture just kind of seems like I'm going to lecture to you, and I certainly don't want to do that. So, so we're going to really just talk about my books. I'm going to show you some things, and you may have noticed there's a large pad of paper here. So we're going to do some drawings too, if that's all right. Is that all right with you guys? All right, so I was Karen gave you a little bit of a background, but one thing she forgot to mention, because I forgot to put it in my information, is I was born in Maine. I live in Maine now, but I lived just a couple towns over. I lived in Harvard, Massachusetts, and I went to all the schools over there from kindergarten right up through high school. And we used to come over to Concord a lot, especially at Christmas time, and visit the stores. And is there anybody here that's lived in Concord like their whole life, that's been here for a long, long time? Well, I was thinking older people, but yeah. So we used to go to this restaurant. I don't know if anyone remembers. It was called the Willow Pond Kitchen. Remember the Willow Pond Kitchen? It was the only restaurant I knew that actually had frog's legs on the menu. And every time we went to the Willow Pond Kitchen, for some reason, they always sat us on the table right outside the kitchen door. And halfway through our meal, they would start mopping the kitchen floor with ammonia, which added a different sensation to the frog's legs. But we used to come over there into the Cordova Museum, of course, and as kids, we used to take field trips over here as well. But so we're practically neighbors at one point. So I started out by being an illustrator before I became an author. So I was doing illustrations for all sorts of things before I started doing books. And I brought some examples of some of the illustrations I've done over the years. I brought them in this portfolio here. Are you folks familiar with a place called LL Bean? All right, so LL Bean does these catalogs all the time. And usually on the cover of the catalog, there's usually an illustration or a painting. And these are a couple of the illustrations I've done for LL Bean over the year. I've done about 14 catalog covers over the year. But this looks a little different than my books, doesn't it? You don't see Mr. McGee on the cover of the LL Bean catalog. But that's one type of illustration I do. I'm also the illustrator who drew this thing, which is the Maine lobster license plate. So my car is over here in the lot, and it's got the plate on it. So now at home in Maine, I drive around in my car, and I see my picture on other people's cars. That's kind of weird, isn't it? But that's another type of illustration I do. But I really like doing things for kids, and here's an example of that. This is a small version of a poster I did for Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus back when they were still up and running. The actual illustration, the big poster was about twice as big as this, and the illustration I did for the poster was actual size. So the illustration I did for this poster was about this big. I had to literally crawl up on my drawing table to paint the upper parts and sort of make sure I didn't smear the paint. But I love doing illustrations for kids. I did a lot of work for kids' magazines, and I did a lot of work for all sorts of magazines, but the magazines that I really liked to illustrate were kids' magazines like Nickelodeon Magazine and Disney Adventures, because they really let me just have fun with doing these sort of cartoon illustrations. Now, I thought what we'd do first is I was just going to go through the books and just talk a little bit about the books so we're all familiar with what I've worked on so far. Now, my first book came about in kind of a funny way. So, like I said, I was an illustrator for doing illustrations for magazines before I started writing books. And one day I was in my studio and I was working on an illustration. I can't remember what it was, but it was an illustration for a magazine. And this image popped into my head. And it was a very specific image. And I'm going to see if I can recreate it here on this pad of paper. It looked like this. I'll pull this over here a little. I'm going to do a really quick version of it. It was a man and his dog, and they were stuck in their boat that was on top of a tree. So this image popped into my head. That's a really quick version. And I was working on this illustration. I was like, well, why did that pop into my head? What was the reason that specific image popped in my head? So I grabbed a scrap of paper and I drew something really rough like that, and I kind of set it aside on my drawing table. And I went back to work and I thought, well, who is this man? And what is his story? And how did he get his boat stuck in the top of a tree? And so I thought about that over and over again. I sort of figured out, well, I think I know how he could end up in the tree, but how would he get out of the tree? And 9 years later, from that little sketch, my first book came out. It was called Down to the Sea with Mr. McGee. It was published in the year 2000, so I started in 1991. And the reason it took so much longer than any of my other books is because I made a lot of mistakes at the beginning. I had no idea how to make a book. The early versions were extremely complicated. At one point, the whales could talk, and there was the whale goes back and tells his mother, I blew this man up into a tree, and now I don't know what to do. And his mother said, well, we got to, it just got way too complicated. So I had to write it over and over and over again until I got it just right. And then I went through the whole process of getting published, which is another whole thing. And that could be a whole separate lecture, so we won't get into that right now. But after finding an agent and sending it off to 6 different publishers, Chronicle Books out in San Francisco published it, and it came out in 2000. Now, I was so excited when that book came out. I walked around the house like it was a newborn baby, and I just didn't put it down for about a week. But the thing about books is, if a book comes out, if this book came out and it bombed, if nobody bought it, if nobody liked it, if it got really bad reviews, well, I wouldn't be here talking to you guys today because I probably wouldn't be asked to do another book. But enough kids did like that book that my publisher said, would you like to write another book featuring Mr. McGee? And so my second book became a book called A Camping Spree with Mr. McGee. And that came out in 2003. So it's the same character. He goes off, he thinks he's gonna have a wonderful time, and he ends up stuck in a really bad place. Anybody remember where he gets stuck? Where does he get stuck?
He gets stuck on a river with a bear on his trail.
That's right, he gets stuck in a river in his camper, so yeah. So this one came, like I said, came out in 2003. Now when it came time for me to write my third book, I wasn't sure I wanted to write another Mr. McGee book right away. Not that that would be the worst thing in the world, but I wanted to sort of expand a little bit and try something a little different. Now, I'm a huge Dr. Seuss fan. And when I was writing the Mr. McGee books, I read a lot of Dr. Seuss books. In fact, I remember like at nighttime, my wife and I would get in bed and she'd pick up some novel and I'd pick up Thidwick the Big-Hearted Moose, and we would both be reading intently from our books. But I studied a lot of Dr. Seuss books, and the more books I read by Dr. Seuss, I realized in several of his books, he wrote with what's called what I call the Dr. Seuss formula. And let me explain what that is. It's really best explained in a book like If I Ran the Zoo. So If I Ran the Zoo starts out with a boy at the zoo, and he says, well, that's not the first page, actually, it's this page right here. There's the boy, there's the zookeeper. And he says, this zoo is okay, but if I ran the zoo, I think I would capture, let all the animals go, and then I'd capture this one, and each page sort of becomes a different creature he would collect for his zoo. And it gets bigger and bigger, and they get sort of crazier and crazier, until there's these gigantic flying birds or whatever that they collect for the zoo. And the very end, it ends up exactly like it started with the boy back in the zoo. So it's all been his imagination. He also did this to great success, I think, with If I Ran the Circus, one of my favorites. So I thought it would be really fun to write a book with that in that formula, where it starts with a character and he has sort of uses imagination. But I didn't want to copy Dr. Seuss, and so I started thinking about what I'd like to write about, and I'm always interested in cars. I've always been interested in cars since I was a little kid. Especially the cars that were on the cover of Popular Science magazine that said, you're gonna fly down the highway and you're gonna be having coffee in the back and it's magnetic and you won't have to do anything. So anyway, all those things led to my third book, which is called If I Built a Car. Again, it starts with a boy named Jack. He dreams up this crazy car, and when you get to the end of it, it flies and it can go underwater and all these crazy things, and then you realize it's all been his imagination. This was the first If I Built book that I wrote. Came out in 2005, and I'll show you a couple more as we go through the stack here. 2005 was also the year I was asked to illustrate books by another author. First time I had done that, and the author just happens to be Kate DiCamillo. And you guys probably know some of these books about this pig named Mercy Watson. Aw. So Mercy Watson is this character that Kate DiCamillo created, and I was asked by the publisher if I'd like to illustrate them, which was kind of like one of these golden phone calls. You know, it's like I could hold the phone down and see a rainbow come out. And so this was the first book in the series, Mercy Watson, The Rescue. There's number 1 on the spine because there are 6 books in the original series. In each one of these books, I had to paint about 50 color illustrations. So altogether, I had to paint about 300 pig pictures. And that took me about 4 years. And I tell kids that's what it's like to be a freelance illustrator. One day you get a call from somebody you don't know, you've never worked with before, and they say, how would you like to spend the next 4 years of your life painting pigs? And I'm like, sign me up. I'm ready. After that came probably my favorite book and one of my more popular books called The Circus Ship. The circus ship is based on a true story. There really was a ship carrying a circus, and it sank off the coast of Maine where I live now. I live in a little town in mid-coast Maine, and there's a big body of water called Penobscot Bay right outside. And back in 1836, there was a ship carrying a circus that sank in the waters of Penobscot Bay. Do you want to see a picture of it? Check this out. This is as good as they got when they had to depict a ship. This is an engraving of the Royal Tar, the ship that the circus ship is based on. And this is how they would illustrate newspaper articles about the event. Now, this was a huge event. It happened in 1836 on October 25th, almost to the day. It was carrying an elephant, which you can see swimming down in the foreground, and it had a tiger and a lion and exotic birds and all sorts of things. Now, circuses weren't like circuses that we think of now. Remember that poster I showed you before? They didn't have clowns, they didn't have acrobats, none of those things. It was basically just a collection of animals that they would bring around and they would put on display in the towns that they would visit. Now, that might sound kind of boring to you and me, but if in 1836, if you could go down to your town common and pay a nickel and see a live tiger, that'd be pretty cool, right? Or an elephant standing there. I mean, that's what they did. They went around, they displayed these animals. So now when I first read about this, it must have lodged in the back of my head somewhere because I wasn't writing books at the time. It was back when I was doing illustrations for magazines. But when it came time for me to write this book, it sort of popped back in and I thought, I wonder if I can make that work. And so I changed the story around considerably to make it more appropriate for kids. And that book became The Circus Ship. Now, the reason I think this is probably one of my more popular books is because it has actually been printed in several different languages. And I brought some examples to show you. This is a Norwegian version of The Circus Ship. It's called The Circus Skippet. This is a Dutch version of The Circus Ship. Now the circus ship is all one word, and it says circus chip on the end. This is a French version. Apparently I'm playing big in Northern Europe. But this is a French version of The Circus Ship. And this time they actually changed the title of the book. And I want to tell you what the title translates to. Does anybody speak French here? You do? Yeah. Do you know what that, do you know what? Can't read it. Oh, you can't read it? Okay. It's le joyeux, which is the happy, right? And then the word naufrage, something like that. It's the happy shipwreck. I kid you not, it's the happy shipwreck. So, which is kind of strange, it's kind of like saying the merry old car crash or something. But, and then this one, which I received not too long ago, is a Korean version of The Circus Ship. And this one probably has the most unusual title of all, because this one does not translate to The Circus Ship. This translates to 15 Animal Drifting Machine. And the reason I know that is because I brought this around to a library. This was like a year or so ago. And I didn't know what the title translated to, but it does have a number 15 at the front of the title. So I knew it wasn't probably the circus ship, but that's how many animals there were on the boat. And so I met this girl at this event, and she had this app on her phone, and she said, I can tell you what that is. And she took a picture of the cover of the book, and she waited like 2 seconds, and then this changed to English, and it said, 15 Animal Drifting Machine by Chris Van Dusen. So, that was followed by another Mr. McGee, my third Mr. McGee book called Learning to Ski with Mr. McGee. I thought it'd be fun to introduce Mr. McGee to a new season, so that's sort of a wintertime story, obviously. And then I wrote a very strange book. You guys seen this one? So this is a book called King Hugo's Huge Ego. I think it's my favorite title of all my books, and I can say that because my wife came up with the title. It's about a king who's very short. He's about 3'3", and he's got a huge ego, which means he thinks he's the most wonderful king in the whole wide world, and he likes to tell everybody how wonderful he is, and they get really annoyed with him. It's kind of a strange book, to be honest with you. There's one illustration in here where his head basically explodes. And I was working on this illustration. I'll show you too. I was working on this oops, not there. I was working on this illustration, and I came down. My studio is attached to my house, and I came down for lunch, and I said to my wife, I said, I don't know about this book. She said, what's the matter? I said, I don't know, it's kind of gross. And she didn't miss a beat. She just said, kids love gross. Anyway, it's kind of a funny book. Then came a book called Randy Riley's Really Big Hit in 2012. Oh, I forgot to tell you about the circus ship. There's actually talk about having it made into a movie too, so that'd be kind of cool. Then came my second If I Built book called If I Built a House. This time Jack shows his mom through the rooms of this house, and it gets crazier and crazier, but it ends up just being his imagination. I've also started working on a new series with Katie Camillo. This is a spin-off from the Mercy Watson books. These are called Tales from Decawoo Drive. And this was the first one called Leroy Ninker Saddles Up. There are actually going to be 7 books in this series, and the last book comes out in December of this year. So it's called Mercy Watson is Missing. So that's the last book in this series, but these are for slightly older kids. I've only written one book that does not rhyme, and that's a book called Hattie and Hudson. You have that book? It's actually one of my favorite books. You have this book? It's a book about a little girl who lives on a lake in Maine with her parents, and she befriends this gigantic lake monster. You can see it on the front and the back cover. The reason it's a non-rhyming book is it's actually started out as a rhyming book, but it's a little bit more serious than some of my other books. And so I thought it didn't make sense for me to try to write like a serious story in sort of a humorous, whimsical way. I was just kind of missing the mark, and I couldn't figure out what was wrong with it. Because the rhyme was okay, but I just finally called my editor and I said, I don't know what's wrong with this book. I cannot make it work. And she said, yeah, you're right, it's not working. And I said, how about if I write it non-rhyming? And she said, yeah, send a couple pages non-rhyming. So I sent a couple pages, and she said, that's it. That's what the problem was. So that's my only non-rhyming book. I've also done some picture books with Katie Camillo. There's a backstory of Mercy Watson, how Mercy Watson came to live with the Watsons. This is called A Piglet Named Mercy. Because if you've read the first Mercy Watson book, it starts with Mr. and Mrs. Watson have a pig named Mercy. And the illustration I did was showing these 2 adults tucking a pig into bed and singing her goodnight. It doesn't say, why? Where did the pig come from? Why is it living in this house with these people? So this kind of tells the backstory of how Mercy Watson came to live with Watsons. My third If I Built book was If I Built a School. This is one of my newer books. And then my latest book is called Big Truck, Little Island. And this is loosely based on a true story. This also happened on the same island where the circus ship sank. So I've got a lot of material from Vinyl Haven Island in mid-coast Maine. So, all right, I'm just going to set these aside. Now, since we have a lot of kids here, and I bet you guys would like to hear a story. Would you guys like to hear a story? So I have what's called a big book version of one of my books. And it's really easy for everybody to see the pictures because it's really huge. So that's the one I'd like to read today. And if it's all right, I would like to read 15 Animal Drifting Machine to you guys. So this is the exact same thing as the smaller version that you guys have, but this is used mostly for libraries, schools, and it's just easier for you kids to see. So let's read The Circus Ship, came out in 2009, published by Candlewick Press in Somerville, Massachusetts. Before we start, I just want to show you a couple things. This is the title page, and I did this piece of artwork to look like those old posters that they would put up around. They were called broadsides. And if you look really closely on either side of the word "the," there's a little engraving of a steamship. And that's the actual ship, the one I just showed you in the engraving back here. That's the Royal Tar. I found it in a little advertisement in a book. It was advertising a journey on the Royal Tar. Now, you're probably wondering, what does that mean? What does Royal Tar mean? Well, tar is British slang for sailor. And King Henry IV was a very avid sailor. So the boat was named after King Henry IV, so he's the Royal Sailor or the Royal Tar. That's how it got to the name of the boat. So anyway, let's see what happens in this book. Now, I've got this book memorized. I don't have to look at the pictures, so I can just the words, so I can just show you the pictures. And also a couple things. There's a kind of a mean guy in this book. Does anybody remember him? The circus guy. Yeah, do you remember his name? Mr. Payne. That's right. So when I get to Mr. Payne, I do a really loud voice. Is that all right? Okay. I'm going to blow up my microphone, I think, with that one, but we'll see what happens. Okay, here we go. 5 miles off the coast of Maine and slightly overdue. Should I look under or over? A circus ship was steaming south in fog as thick as stew. On board were 15 animals who traveled to and fro. The next day it was Boston for another circus show. The captain, Mr. Carrington, was honest and sincere. He thought that they should drop the hook and wait for things to clear. What does that mean, drop the hook and wait for things to clear? Do you know?
Set anchor.
Set anchor and wait for the fog to go away. That's exactly right. But Mr. Payne, the circus boss, was terribly demanding. He stomped up to the helm where Captain Carrington was standing and screamed, "Don't stop, keep going. I've got a show to do. Just get me down to Boston town tomorrow, sir, by 2. Think he's a nice guy? Then came a crash, an awful bash. Things flew into the air. The ship had smashed into a ledge that no one knew was there. Here you can see above and below the water, and you can see the hull smashing into the rock, and it's put a big hole into the bottom of the ship. The shattered ship began to tip, then sank without a sound. The splashing, thrashing animals swam round and round and round. The captain said to Mr. Payne, "Pray tell, what shall we do? We can't just leave them here to drown. We've got to save them too." "The animals?" yelled Mr. Payne. "Why, sir, what are you, daft? It's me that you should rescue. Pull me up into the raft. Now ferry me to safety, sir, before I die of cold." "Don't question me," barked Mr. Payne. "Just do as you are told." He's still cranky, isn't he? Through chilly water all night long, the animals swam on until they reached an island beach just before the dawn. They pulled themselves up on the shore, bedraggled, cold, and beat, then staggered to the village on weary, wobbly feet. The people in the neighborhood had just begun to rise, and when they saw those animals, they had to rub their eyes. They thought they saw an elephant, but wait, how could that be? And what's that little monkey doing in the cherry tree? Guys, imagine waking up one morning and seeing an elephant walk by your bedroom window? Or a tiger? Or a giraffe? Soon animals were everywhere and into everything. There's an ostrich in the outhouse. There's a hippo in the spring. There's a tiger in the tulip. There's a lion on the lawn. There's a python in the pantry. It went on and on and on. Mr. Hood was stacking wood and nearly jumped a mile when he found the alligator sleeping on his pile. And Mrs. Dottie Daly, who grew daisies by the bunch, discovered that the zebra had been eating them for lunch. And Miss Fanny Feeney found, according to the rumors, the silly little circus monkey swinging in her bloomers. Kids love that because it's underwear. So. But everything changed quickly, like the turning of the tide, the night the Abbot's shed caught fire with Emma Rose inside. From high above the Abbot's farm, the tiger saw the shed. The sight of smoke and fire triggered something in his head. He jumped through flames 1,000 times back in his circus days, so he ran past all the people and he leapt into the blaze. Then everybody panicked, "Help! Help! What can we do?" When from the raging fire, something big burst into view. It was the most amazing sight, and everybody froze when they saw the tiger saving little Emma Rose. See the girl in the back of the tiger? Yeah. The tiger's risky rescue changed everybody's mind. The animals weren't bothersome. The animals were kind. And so they lived together side by side. They got along. It didn't seem like anything could possibly go wrong. That's called foreshadowing. Then Little Red the messenger came running with the word. Apparently a circus ship had sunk from what he'd heard. The animals are from that boat. They swam in from the bay. The greedy owner wants them back. He'll be here any day. So the people called a meeting and they quickly hatched a plan. No animal that came ashore would sail off with that man. Remember which man we're talking about? The next day at the crack of dawn, a ship was at the pier, and up the lane marched Mr. Payne, whose voice was loud and clear. "I am the circus owner. My ship sank in the murk. I've come to find my animals and put them back to work." He hiked until he came into the center of the town. His face was red. He scratched his head. He stood there with a frown. Mr. Payne looked high and low, but still he couldn't see the 15 circus animals of his menagerie. Now, I'm going to pause here for just a second because if you're a parent that has little kids and you're trying to get them to go to bed, I apologize for this page. because every time the kids are going to want to find the animals. And there are 15 animals hiding. Some are easy, some are hard. When I first did this illustration, some kids came up to my studio, and I had just finished this illustration. And I said, I wonder if these kids can find the animals. And I said, can you guys find the animals in this picture? And they just went, boop, 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 boop. And I was like, oh, come on. But anyway, so it's kind of an empowering thing for kids, I think. He ran around the alleyways. He searched the village square. He even checked a chicken coop. His animals weren't there. Mr. Payne was tuckered out. His heavy chest was heaving. Then Little Red stepped up and said, I think your boat is leaving. He ran off in a fit of rage. His ship was leaving sight. So he jumped into a rowboat and he rowed with all his might. And from that day, they like to say, their lives were free of pain. It was a happy, peaceful place upon that isle in Maine. This book took me a long time to illustrate, and it took me over a year just to illustrate the pictures in this book. This has the distinction of being the book with the illustration that took me the least amount of time of any illustration. This one took about 2 days, day and a half, 2 days. And it has the distinction of being the one that took the longest amount of time, which is this one. This took me about 5 weeks to paint this picture. I didn't think I was ever going to get this picture done. I'd get done after a whole 8-hour day working on a section, and I'd maybe paint like that much. And I'd sit back and I'd go, are you kidding? That's all you did? But it just took, I had to make sure that all the animals are hiding and that everything's, just right. Some are hard, some are easy. And this is where Mr. McGee is hiding, in case you haven't found him in this book. He's over here in this little doorway. In fact, it's a sign says M. McGee and D. And you can see Mr. McGee and his little dog D looking out the door. And they kind of have the expression like, what the heck are we doing in this book? So it's just kind of a fun thing. Before we go on, I just want to show you one of the original illustrations from this book. They're actually smaller than the big book version, but larger than the book that you have. And this is what they look like. This is the actual illustration that I did for the part where the animals swim ashore. This one didn't take 5 weeks. This one maybe took like 3 weeks or something like that. But it depends on how much detail's in a picture as to how long it takes to illustrate it or to paint it. When I'm working on an illustration like this, I do all my illustrations with a paint called gouache. I tell kids it rhymes with the word squash. That's an easy way to remember it. But gouache is like an opaque watercolor. So you can use very little, you can mix it with very little water and it becomes sort of thick, almost like an oil or an acrylic paint. Or you can use a lot of water and you can do these big washes. When I'm doing an outside scene like this, I usually start with the sky. I usually work from the background to the foreground. So I did the sky first, and then I painted this water, and you can see the water's pretty loose. I painted yellow, and then I took a blue, which turned to green, and just kind of put these streaks through it with a brush, with the edge of a brush, and kind of went very, very quickly and let that dry. And then I could build up the paint on top of that. So all these animals are actually painted on top of the watercolor because you can hide things with gouache. That's why I like it, because you can hide your mistakes. So that's just an example of one of the illustrations. Now, I'm going to do some drawings for you guys, but before we do that, I just want to explain a little bit about how I create a book, because some of you adults might be interested in this, and I'll try to make it entertaining for you guys too. I first of all have to come up with an idea, and one of the questions I get asked most of all from kids when I visit schools or libraries, they say, where did you get your ideas? Well, I never know when I'm getting an idea. Remember, this idea just popped into my head and it became a book. Sometimes I read something like the circus ship was based on a true story, which I read the article in the magazine. In fact, that picture that I showed you, this was blown up from a magazine illustration illustrating this story. And when I was flipping through this magazine, I almost didn't even stop to read this article until I saw this elephant in the foreground. And I thought, no, wait, there's a story here. So sometimes I even have a dream where I think it would be a good idea for a book. So I had a dream a couple years ago, and I want to tell you guys about it, especially you kids. Have you ever had a dream that's so good that when you wake up, you try to go back to sleep so you can hop back into the dream? Yeah. Have you ever done that? Yeah. So this is the dream I had. I had a flying bicycle. And my driveway at my house kind of goes up to the road. It kind of goes up a little incline. And I remember in that dream, I like pedaled up and it just magically lifted off. And I had a big tree at the end of my driveway. And I banked around the tree. And my neighbor came out and I waved to her. She was waving to me in her lawn. And then I went down the road and I was curving between the trees and people were coming out and waving. And then you know what happened? I woke up. And I tried to get back to sleep because I thought it would be really fun to see where I was going to go on this bike, but I didn't get back to sleep. But I always keep a little pad of paper by my bedside, and I wrote my new flying bike on the pad of paper, and I set it aside. I have a whole folder in my studio of all just random story ideas. That's as far as that got. I didn't write a story about it, but I still have that little scrap of paper that says my new flying bike. So I never know when an idea is going to hit me, and I have to make sure I write it down before I forget it. When I actually do a book, I'm going to flip this over because I'm going to show you. I have these forms that I've printed up at home, and they kind of look like this. They're not very exciting, but they're a series of rectangles, and each one of these rectangles represents a spread in the book. Now, a spread is the 2 pages across the gutter. So this is a spread right here, this one page and the other page. So each one of these pages indicates a spread. Now, I haven't even written the story at this point. I've got the idea for the story, but I haven't written the story. But I have to make sure it fits on the number of pages that a book is. Most children's picture books are 32 pages. Sometimes they go to 40 pages, and sometimes they go to 48 pages. Now, what's the thing here we're doing? We're multiplying it by 8 each time. That's because when they print books, they print them on these huge pieces of paper called signatures. And the signatures hold 8 pages per signature. So they print 4 signatures, they get 32 pages. 5, 40, 6, 48. So it's always a multiple of 8. So I would write like cover. I'd just write cover here. And then I'd write end papers. Those are the things you see when you first open the book. And then I'd do, like sometimes you put copyright page and dedication page maybe here. And then you actually start the story here. And like I might say, Jack is in the car. This is for, if I built a car, is in car. And that's all I would write. And I just go through and I just make notations of what would happen on each page. This way I could make sure the story gets excited when it's supposed to get exciting. It can kind of reach to a climax and then it can resolve to a happy ending. After this, then I write the story, and I don't use a computer because I'm a really horrible typist. So I just write it out longhand on a pad of paper. But a lot of my stories, like you saw, rhyme. And when I write rhyme, I can't sit down and usually write the whole story from start to finish because I might think of a rhyme that works for the back of the book, right? And I don't want to forget it. So I'll take those little scraps of paper that I keep all over my house that I've written notes on, and once I think I've got enough for a story, I'll put them all on my drawing table, and it's almost like a puzzle. Now, when I describe this to other writers, they think, you're crazy. That is no way to work. And it isn't. It works for me, but I don't say, if you're writing a story, this is what you should do, because it would be like really hard for some people. It works for me, but it's kind of a strange way to work. But that's what I do. I just sort of pull it all together, make sure it flows from page to page, and then that's how a story comes together. Once a story is done, I send it off to my agent, who sends it off to a publisher, and they either put it under contract or they reject it, and I still get rejected. I get rejected a lot. So, but if a book is accepted, then I send sketches in of the pages. Once those are approved, then I go to the final art, which is like what I just showed you in there. So a book can sometimes take as long as a year and a half from start to finish. It takes a long time. And then get this is the kicker. So I get a book finally done after I've been working on it for a year, right? And I'm so sick of the book at that point. I just want to get it out of my studio to the publisher. It takes another year before I see it printed. So it's like, remember when you were a kid and you couldn't wait for Christmas? You know, it's like, when is it coming? When is it coming? It was kind of like that. It just takes forever. So the book I have coming out in December, I finished, when did I finish? It was last year sometime. I mean, it was just crazy. I can't even remember what it looks like. So it'll be a surprise when it comes out in December. So that's what it does. Right now I am working on a new story at home. And unfortunately, I can't tell you too much about it, but I can tell you that it's going to be another If I Built book. And this time, Jack is thinking even bigger this time. So it's not a place or a vehicle or something like that. It's even bigger, and it's going to be longer. It's 40 pages instead of 32, and it's going to be spectacular. And it's going to be worth the wait, I promise. So. All right, does anybody have any questions before I do drawings, or do you want to do questions afterwards? Questions after? Okay, questions after. Oh, let's flip this over to a new piece of paper. All right, so I'm going to do a couple drawings for you guys. Actually, let me just set these things aside so I can get to the paper easier. Don't expect any masterpieces because when I do my illustrations at home, I work on my sketches over and over and over and over and over again. I just fine-tune them and fine-tune them and fine-tune them till I get them just right. But I'm going to draw a couple characters. The first character is Mr. McGee's dog. Does anybody know Mr. McGee's dog's name? D, yeah. So we're going to draw a picture of D. We start with a shape that looks like a candy cane. It looks like this. And that's going to be the top of D's head. Can you guys see over there? Kind of. And then if we come out here, we're going to put D's nose, and then it's going to come back and almost connect. It almost looks like a sideways heart, but it's not going to connect because that's D's neck. Now, D is actually a girl dog, so I'll refer to her as her. Which is funny because when I was a kid, I don't know about you guys, but I always thought dogs were boys and cats were girls. You know, it's like, anyway, D is a girl dog. We'll put a little dog collar on D with a ring and a little dog tag. Now, we'll continue her back and we'll come down here, just do a little curve. She has a little stubby tail on the back and one black spot on her back, right in the middle of her back. One of my favorite characters when I was a kid was Snoopy. I loved Snoopy. And so I think D is sort of based on Snoopy in some ways. We'll put her first front leg here, coming down to a little pad and a paw, and their second paw there. And then since she's sitting down, we'll have her kind of hunched up like that, and that's her back leg back there. So it's pretty quick to draw it. Now, let's go back and finish her head now, right? Now, let me grab my marker here, because I always make my dog's noses blue. I don't know why, I just think they look cool when they're blue. So I'm going to take a blue marker, and I'm going to fill this in blue here. Now, do you see how I left a little spot on the top of white? That's so it's a shiny nose. All right, let's go back to the black marker for a sec. We're going to give her that little cleft under her nose, a little smile, maybe her tongue sticking out, and some whiskers. Now, D also has these big floppy ears, and I could show a lot of expression when I'm drawing D just by the shape of the ears. If she's excited, her ears stick straight up. If she's confused, they're kind of cocked in different directions. Mostly she's pretty happy, but since they're big, black, floppy ears, I'm going to pull out the big guns here. Check this out. You ever seen this is a Sharpie Magnum. Look at that thing. Watch this. Oops. Yeah. I knew that would get you. I love that Sharpie. So we'll have one ear hanging down like that, and then we'll have another ear maybe up kind of, maybe it's cocked in the air, and maybe she hears something in the distance. They do kind of run out sometimes, don't they, these markers? So that's her ear kind of listening. She's listening to something in the distance. And are we done? What are we forgetting? We got to do the eyes, right? All right. So the eyes are just going to be two circles right here. And we'll have her looking down like this, and then a little eyebrows like that. And we'll give her a red collar too, because she has a red collar. Should we give her something to eat? Okay. So we'll give her her red dog dish. And, you know, it's one of those kind of inverse dog dish. We'll put her name on it. And what do you think Dee should have for lunch? Hamburger? Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. I like this. Let's make a hamburger. Let's do crinkle cut fries. Is that all right? All right, crinkle cut fries it is. Okay. They look like caterpillars, but that's all right. Anything else? What else should we give Dee? What? Ketchup? You got it, baby. Here we go. It's going to look bloody, but that's all right. There we go. Oh, yummy ketchup. Oh, ketchup for the fries, too. Yeah. Okay. Milkshake? Did I hear milkshake? Wait, what do you guys feed your dogs? Yeah. Oh, we probably should put some dog food in there, too. Yeah, let's put some little kibble down here. We'll put a milkshake back here.
It has to be, it can't be chocolate.
It can't be chocolate. That's true. It can't be chocolate. And we'll put a couple straws. But you know what my dog actually does like? My dog likes carrots. My dog loves carrots. And my dog also loves apples. My dog loves apples. And my dog also loves, what's the other thing? Bananas. She loves bananas. She doesn't like pickles, though. Now I'm going to draw one more character for you guys, and then we'll open it up to some questions. This time, I'm not going to tell you who I'm drawing. I'm going to draw a character from the Mercy Watson books, and this is my favorite character to draw of all my characters. Let's see if you can guess. Looks like a bottle. You know? All right, let's keep going. Close. It's Eugenia Lincoln. She's the lady that lives next door to the Watsons. And she's kind of a mean lady. She does not like Mercy Watson. So in order to give her a kind of a mean look, I decided I would put these glasses on her called cat's eye glasses. And they kind of slant up. And they look like she's mad even without painting or drawing in her eyes. Now, I gotta finish her because she's too creepy right here. She has these things called crow's feet. Do you kids know what crow's feet are? They're those wrinkles that, oh, don't laugh, you'll get them. They're these little wrinkles on the side of your eyes that when you smile, they look like little crow's feet. She's got some cheeks here. And she also has enormous ears. Did you notice that? She has huge ears. Because I learned once that when you're born, your eyes will stay the same size your whole life. But your nose and your ears never stop growing. That's why when you're driving down the road and you're behind like a really old guy in his car, you see his little hat and you see his ears and they go all the way down. So Eugenia has really big ears like that. And then she has a forehead with more wrinkles because she's very old. By the way, when Kate DiCamillo comes up with these characters, she really leaves it up to me as to what they look like. And the only description she gave me for Eugenia and baby Lincoln, the women that live next door, is that they're really old and they're really thin. So, and here's another thing kind of about growing old. Sometimes old ladies have blue hair. And it looks like this. This is how I draw Eugenia's hair. It's just squiggles like that. Oh, I didn't draw the curlers. She does have curlers. Oops, got to put her. She looks like she's bald on top. She does have curlers in one of the books, doesn't she? That's right. I forget about that. All right. Now, another thing about Eugenia is you can tell a lot by the way her body is positioned. So, in almost all the illustrations I've done of Eugenia Lincoln, she looks like this. I'm going to try to do it. She's always mad, so her shoulders go way up high on her body. So she does like, it's kind of, her head gets kind of knocked down like that. And she usually has her hands on her hips, and she goes like this. She goes like this next door. So when I draw her, I usually put her shoulders way up high like this. And then we'll put her hands coming down to her hips here. And she wears this little sweater, this ratty little sweater. And she puts her hands on her hips. And she's got her little sweater here. And this hand, these are bad hands, sorry about that. But I'm just drawing quickly. So it's something like that. Ooh, that's spooky. It's Halloween anyway, right? So, but I love drawing Eugenia. She's a really fun character to draw. So, you guys have been very patient. We've gone about an hour, but now would be a good time to open it up. If anybody has any questions they'd like to ask. Does anybody want to ask me anything? Yes, go ahead. What does she not like? She doesn't like the fact that there is a pig living in the house next door. She thinks pigs belong on farms. That's what she has a problem with. Yes. How do I make more books? Of the same book? Oh, I see what you're saying. So I only have to do the book once. I only have to make one book. And then it's printed by the publisher. So I don't have to do 160,000 books. I only have to do one, and it's printed 160,000 times. Is that what you're talking about? It's all printed. So thankfully, I only have to do one. Yeah. Yes, right here. Good question. I forgot to tell you that. So I have written and illustrated 11 books, and I've illustrated 18 books for other authors. So altogether, we're up at about 29 books, and probably the one I'm working on now would be my 30th book. Yeah. So, yes.
Have you ever considered drawing Dean in a hot dog costume?
Don't tempt me. That would be fun. I can tell you one thing. The street I live in Maine is called the trick-or-treat street for the whole state of Maine. Seriously. It was even in a magazine that said, if you come trick-or-treating in Maine, come to Pearl Street in Camden because everybody shows up. We get about 1,200 kids come to our house. And yeah, it's like I stand at the door and I go, keep going, keep going. I throw the candy and just keep moving. But one time, this family came up, and they walked up, and it was Mr. Watson and Mrs. Watson and Mercy, and this little girl had blue hair, and she stood there like this on my porch. It was like, whew. They came up to Watson. So it's really kind of crazy when they come up as characters I've created. That's a little creepy. Yes, go ahead. Oh, how many times do I have to rewrite it and make it? Oh, yeah. Sometimes it takes a long time. Like Hattie and Hudson, I know I wrote that story at least 9 times before I got it right. And I still think it could use some improvement, but it's too late for that. But yeah, sometimes it comes almost instantly, but sometimes I have to work really hard at it. That was a good question. Yes?
Is that one of your best drawings?
No. But thanks for thinking so, Karen. Okay, great question. First question was, how do you get the characters to look the same throughout the book? And that, believe it or not, is the hardest thing I do when I'm creating a book. Because if you look at some of my first books, like Down to the Sea with Mr. McGee, he looks so different from page to page. It almost looks like, is that his brother, or is that what's going on here? But it's really hard to have a character look the same. And it's just a matter of just sketching and sketching and sketching till you get that consistency. But I still have books, even today, where the characters kind of vary from page to page. So that's really tricky. When I'm working on a book, the other question was, do the words come first or the pictures come first? If we go back to that little diagram I showed you, sometimes when I'm doing this, I will do like, oh, I'm going to show the car like this, you know, and I'll do these little thumbnail sketches. But I really have to write the story completely before I do start working the sketches. So, but sometimes these little thumbnail sketches come into play too. So, yes. Oh, good question. She said, have you ever written a complete story the first try? No. I wish I could. But I will tell you one thing. I find it easier to write in rhyme than in regular prose. For me, I like the structure, and it's easier for me to create a story in rhyme than it is. And some authors think I'm crazy because they struggle with rhyme, and for me, it's easier. But that's just weird me. So yes. Yeah, the question was, do you look for something when you're working with another author, do you look for something that would make that partnership work? The way it worked with the K.T. Camillo books, the Mercy Watson books, is, like I said, the art director just called me up and said they had those manuscripts. I knew K.T. Camillo, I knew she was a fabulous writer, but I still wanted to read the stories before I agreed to do the illustrations. But when I read that first story, it was like, oh yeah, this is it. I mean, it's so perfect. Because not only does Kate write great children's stories, but she also puts enough humor in there for adults to keep them interested too. So I was laughing hysterically when I read those manuscripts, and I could picture those characters in my mind. They just popped into my head, and I said, this is going to be so much fun to just pull these together. So she's been a dream to work with. I have worked with some other authors that sometimes are a little difficult. Sometimes art directors can get a little difficult too. Sometimes they over-art direct, which means they try to make it so correct and so... Well, I'll give you an example. I had to do an illustration of a giant, and like a fairy tale giant. And I immediately thought of those old Walt Disney cartoons that showed the giant up in the clouds with the page boy haircut, and he's kind of goofy, and he's big, and he's wearing a little green tunic and stuff. And so that's the way I drew, I pictured it, so I drew something like that. And the art director said, or the editor said, well, you know, we don't have many girls in this book, so could you make the giant a girl instead of a male, or a female instead of a male? And I said, okay, so I drew this sort of bratty, sort of Victorian giant with these little curls, and she was in a little pinafore or something, I don't know. And I was like, I don't know if this is working. So I sent that in, and they said, what if we change her to an African-American girl giant? And I was like, okay. So I tried to draw that out, and then I realized, you know, this is really insulting. It's kind of gone a little bit too far. I mean, what was supposed to be just kind of a silly, goofy giant is trying to get really sort of politically correct. Now, that said, I really work hard, especially in my newer books, to include diverse characters because that's a big, big issue in children's books now. A lot of kids didn't see themselves in some of my earlier books, and I apologize for that. But now I include characters of different races, boys and girls, different religions even, and try to even address the LGBTQ plus. So I try to include all those. But sometimes when things get a little bit, that's supposed to be just fun and kind of goofy, gets a little bit too politically correct, it kind of loses it for me. So, and that was the case, but yeah. Wow. I don't know why that went there. But anyway. Why did I start writing books? That's a really good question. I'll tell you a funny story. So I used to do a lot of magazine illustrations. And when you do an illustration in a magazine, you know what happens to it? It gets thrown away, right? And I remember one day I went to the dump, and at my dump we have these recycle bins. And one's for cans, and one's for bottles, and one's for newspapers and magazines. And I was one day, and I was kind of throwing my magazines, I looked at it, I went, hey, I did that. and then I went, oh, I did that, and it's in the dump. And I kind of felt bad. I mean, I shouldn't. I mean, I don't expect people to hang on to everything, but I kind of felt bad that someone was throwing away my work. You know what I mean? So I wanted to do something that was a little bit more permanent, something that people might actually want to hang on to. And I also wanted to illustrate my own stories too, because I was illustrating other people's words when I was working in magazines. So that's when I had a chance to create the story and do the illustrations, and then it becomes really like your own project, your own little babies. So that's why I did that. Couple more? Yes.
A couple of questions, if that's okay. So one, with the rhyming books being translated into other languages, how do they manage that? Have you seen the literal translations?
Well, you know, it's funny because I had that same question when my book came out. And I noticed that I could see the words and I could tell that they were rhyming. So they even rhymed them in their languages. Can you imagine how hard that would be? But I have a friend who can actually speak Dutch. And when I got the Dutch version of the circus ship, I had her read that page where there's a tiger in the tulip, there's a lion on the lawn. And when she got down and she read the python in the pantry, she read it in Dutch to me. And I said, now what does that translate to? And she said, that translates to, there's a python in the office. I said, huh. So they had to tweak some of the words in their languages to make the rhyme work. So that's, you know, but it's kind of interesting that they actually did bother to have the stories rhyme in those languages, because I think that'd be really hard. Did you have another question?
Yeah, just about perseverance. And I imagine that you've suffered some strong critiques throughout your career. I'd like to know what the hardest one was to kind of deal with and how you persevered.
The hardest book?
The hardest critique that you've received.
People have been pretty kind to me, actually. The only negative critique I got of the circus ship, no, not circus ship, I'm sorry, If I Built a Car, was this reviewer wrote this really nice review, and he said, the only bone I have to pick is that this book obviously takes place in the early 1960s. It has kind of that retro feel. And it talks about Belize. We fly over land, we fly overseas to Alaska, Nebraska, Bermuda, Belize. And he said, Belize wasn't named Belize until the so-and-so. Before that, it was British Honduras. And he said, but I give the authors some leeway there because it would be really hard to rhyme with British Honduras. So that was, I remember that was like the negative. It's like, if that's the only thing they have bad to say, I'll take that. So, yeah. But they've been pretty kind, I got to say, yeah. Did you have a question? Go ahead. How does Mr. McGee ski? Not very well. Yeah. In fact, he's on the cover. He's crossing the tips of his skis as he's going down the hill. And when you do that, you usually flip over and land on your face. So
You just land on your face. There's no something you just face plant.
yeah, face plant. It's a face plant. So he doesn't ski very well. So he's trying to learn how to ski. You haven't skied before? Yeah. You know how I ski? I ski just like Mr. McGee. In fact, people call me Mr. McGee at my local ski area. Just a couple more because you guys have been here, sitting here a long time. Go ahead.
When did you start writing books? I mean, illustrating books.
Illustrating books? I actually illustrated a book before the Down to the Sea with Mr. McGee, but it's a book that went out of print pretty quickly. And I'm kind of glad it was because the illustrations weren't very good. It was about a cat that lived in a bookstore. It was called Silas the Bookstore Cat. And I didn't write the story, I just did the illustrations. And there's two things I can't draw very well, and that are horses and cats. So my first book was about a cat. Go figure. I was glad that one went out of print. So how about one more? Who's got a real killer question? How about you right back there? Go ahead.
You got a question that has two comments.
Okay, I'll take a comment.
My dad used very weird voices for the circus ship.
I would love to hear that.
Also, that picture you drew of the car, if you turn your head this way, it sort of looks like a mad lady.
This one looks like a mad lady?
Yeah.
Do you see a mad lady there? Oh,
The mouth, the neck, and the ear.
okay. I'll take it. All right. I guess we're gonna sign some books. Is that right now, Karen? So thank you guys for coming. I really appreciate it. It was really nice to be with you.